Have you ever watched a parent slap their own child in front of 200 people because she refused to be robbed? I have. Because it happened to me. On stage. At the Plaza Hotel. My mother, Tiffany, handed me a pen and a legal document she called a gift. It wasn't a gift. It was a transfer deed for my $4.5 million penthouse. When I said no, her hand connected with my face so hard that my diamond earring flew across the stage and skittered across the marble floor. The microphone caught her whisper, but it sounded like a scream in my ears. You've always been a parasite. Give your sister the home she deserves. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just bent down, picked up my earring, and walked out of the ballroom. Before we continue, have you ever been put on the spot by family in public? Drop a yes or no in the comments below. I want to know if I'm the only one who's lived through this nightmare. My name is Sierra, and for 29 years, I was the invisible wallet of the family. My sister, Amber, was the investment. I was the expense account. My father, Sean, liked to call me sensible. That was his code word for useful. Amber was spirited. That was his code word for expensive. I worked as a forensic auditor for one of the biggest firms in New York City. To my family, my job was just boring paperwork. They didn't understand it. And they didn't care to. All they knew was that I made good money. And because I was single and sensible. That money was family property. It started small. Bail money when Amber got arrested for shoplifting a designer belt. Don't ruin her record. Sierra. She's just a kid. I paid it. Then it was a car. She needs reliable transportation for her auditions. I paid the down payment. Then it was her lifestyle brand that never launched. Invest in your sister's dream. I wrote the check. I wrote checks for 10 years because I had been trained to believe that my only value was my solvency. I was the safety net. Amber was the trapeze artist. But the cruelty wasn't just financial. It was the way they spoke about me when they thought I wasn't listening. At the cocktail hour before the reception, I was standing near a pillar, checking emails, when I heard Tiffany's voice. She was holding court with a group of her tennis club friends. Sierra is fragile, she was saying, her voice lowered in faux concern. We let her manage the penthouse for now. But honestly, it's too much for her. She gets overwhelmed so easily. It's really a custodial arrangement until Amber settles down. A custodial arrangement. My home. The apartment I bought with my own bonus money and a legacy from my great-aunt Margaret. Tiffany was rewriting reality in real time, painting me as mentally unstable to justify what she was about to do. She was pre-selling the theft. If I was crazy, then taking my home wasn't robbery. It was a mercy. It's a specific kind of trap. Isn't it? The trap of normalized cruelty. You grow up thinking that love is a transaction. You think if you just pay enough, if you just fix enough problems, eventually they will see you. Eventually, you will be worth more than just the check you write. But that's the lie. You are never buying love. You are just paying rent for a space in their lives that they will evict you from the moment you stop paying. I realized standing there that the slap on stage wasn't a sudden break. It was the inevitable conclusion of 1,000 tiny cuts. They didn't see a daughter on that stage. They saw an ATM that had malfunctioned. And you don't negotiate with a broken machine. You hit it. But they forgot one thing. I wasn't just sensible. I was a forensic auditor. I hunt financial predators for a living. And I had been watching them for a long time. When I walked out of the ballroom, I didn't go to the bathroom to cry. I didn't call a friend to vent. I walked to a quiet alcove in the lobby, sat down on a velvet bench, and opened my laptop. My cheek was still throbbing, but my mind was ice cold. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. This was an audit, and I was about to close the books. For the last 18 months, I had been living a double life. To Tiffany and Sean, I was the boring daughter who pushed papers. To great-aunt Margaret, I was her personal investigator. Margaret was 80 years old, sharp as a tack, and wealthier than the rest of the family combined. She had built a real estate empire from scratch in the 70s. Tiffany liked to tell people that Margaret was slipping, that she was confused and needed rest. She had moved Margaret into a luxury care facility that cost $25,000 a month and restricted her visitors. It's for her own good. Tiffany would sigh. She doesn't recognize anyone. That was a lie. Margaret recognized everything. She had called me a year and a half ago. Using a burner phone she bribed a nurse to buy. Sierra, she had whispered. Your father is moving money. I can feel it. I need you to look. So I looked. I used every tool in my arsenal. I tracked wire transfers, cross-referenced shell companies, and dug through digital trash bins. I didn't just look at papers. I looked at the metadata. I traced IP addresses. I built a map of my father's greed. And tonight, I was going to show them the territory. I logged into my secure server. The file was named Project Glasshouse. I scrolled past the smaller thefts, the skimmed dividends, the padded expenses. I was looking for the kill shot. And there it was. The signature mismatch. 6 months ago, a property in the Hamptons, Margaret's favorite summer estate, had been sold for $1.8 million. The deed of sale bore Margaret's digital signature. But the metadata told a different story. The IP address for the signature didn't originate from the care facility. It originated from my parents' house in Westchester. Specifically, from a device named Sean's MacBook Pro. And the timestamp? 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. Margaret was asleep. Sean was awake. And he was stealing. But where did the money go? I followed the trail. The $1.8 million hit a shell account in the Caymans. Sat there for 24 hours. And then split. $500,000 went to the wedding planner for Amber's dream day. $200,000 went to Tiffany's consulting firm, a company with no clients and no employees. And the rest? The remaining $1.1 million went to a gambling site hosted in Malta. My father hadn't just stolen from a dying woman to pay for a wedding. He had stolen to feed an addiction that was eating him alive. He wasn't a businessman. He was a junkie with a checkbook. And Tiffany knew. She had to know. You don't spend $500,000 on flowers without asking where it came from. This was the arrogance of mediocrity. They thought because I didn't scream. I didn't see. They thought because my job was boring. I was stupid. They forgot that boring people are the ones who pay attention to the details. They forgot that every digital action leaves a scar. And I had the map to every single wound they had inflicted. I looked at the screen. The evidence was irrefutable. Bank routing numbers. Timestamps. Geolocations. It was a perfect, beautiful cage. And they had walked right into it. I closed the laptop. The sound of the lid snapping shut felt like a gavel hitting a block. I stood up and smoothed my dress. I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to hide. I was going back into that ballroom. Tiffany wanted a show? I was going to give her a finale she would never forget. I walked back toward the double doors. The music had stopped. I could hear the murmur of the crowd. The anxious energy of a party that had gone off the rails. It was the sound of expensive people being uncomfortable. I pushed the doors open. The atmosphere in the room was brittle. 200 guests turned to look at me. I saw pity in some eyes. Judgment in others. They saw a woman who had been slapped and humiliated. They saw a victim returning to the scene of the crime. But they weren't looking closely enough. Tiffany was standing at the microphone. Her face flushed. Her eyes darting around the room like a cornered animal trying to look dignified. When she saw me enter, her entire posture changed. Her shoulders dropped. A smile broke across her face, not a warm smile, but the triumphant, predatory smile of a gambler who thinks the bluff worked. "See?" she said into the mic, her voice booming through the speakers, regaining its polished confidence. "She's back. I told you all. She just needed a moment to collect herself. Sierra is a good girl. She knows what's right." She thought she had won. She looked at me and saw submission. She thought I was walking back to that stage to sign the deed. To surrender my home to save her reputation. That arrogance was her fatal error. It was the blind spot that was about to cost her everything. She assumed I was operating on emotion. On shame. She forgot that I operate on facts. I walked down the center aisle. I could feel Sean's eyes on me from the front row. He looked pale, sweating through his tuxedo. He knew I handled audits. He knew I was thorough. But even he couldn't imagine I had accessed the one account he thought was hidden. He was banking on my silence. Just like he had banked on his poker hands, Tiffany reached out a hand, beckoning me to the stage like a dog she had just disciplined. "Come here. Darling. Let's finish this. The notary is waiting." I walked up the stairs. The stage lights were blinding. I looked at my sister, Amber, standing there in her couture gown, looking bored and entitled, waiting for her gift. I looked at Tiffany, holding the pen out to me. I took the pen. I held it for a second, letting the tension in the room peak. Tiffany's smile widened. She turned to the crowd, ready to accept their applause for her parenting skills. I set the pen down on the podium with a sharp click. Then, I reached into my purse. I didn't pull out a tissue. I didn't pull out the deed. I pulled out a 6-foot HDMI cable. Tiffany frowned, her confusion rippling through her composure. "What are you doing? The deed is right there." "You're right." Mother, I said, my voice steady, amplified by the microphone she had forgotten to take back. We should finish this. I plugged the cable into my laptop, the massive screens behind the stage, which had been cycling through photos of Amber's childhood, flickered and went black. I have a gift for Amber. 2. I continued, looking out at the sea of tuxedos and gowns. A wedding present. The truth. I hit the spacebar. The screens lit up behind me. It wasn't a sentimental photo montage. It was a spreadsheet. Rows and columns of stark, high-definition numbers projected 20 feet high. The header read in bold. Black letters. Unauthorized asset transfers. Estate of Margaret Vance. A hush fell over the room. It was instant and absolute. The kind of silence that happens when a glass shatters at a funeral. 200 of New York's elites stared at the screen, their champagne glasses frozen halfway to their mouths. What is this? Tiffany hissed, her nails digging into my arm. Turn it off. Right now. No, I said, pulling my arm away. I turned to the screen, using my hand to guide their eyes. Look at the dates. Mother, look at the amounts. I pointed to the first entry. September 12th, $1.8 million. Transferred from Margaret's trust. I hit the next slide. A bank statement appeared, magnified so every digit was visible. Destination, Sean Personal LLC. I hit the next slide. A log from a gambling website hosted in Malta. Final destination, high-stakes poker. The room erupted. It wasn't a roar. It was a wave of gasps and whispers. The sound of chairs scraping against the floor as people leaned in. Trying to process the violation, Tiffany was screaming now, her voice shrill and desperate. Lies. She's lying. She forged this. She's mentally ill. Cut the feed. Someone cut the feed. But I kept going. I was calm. I was methodical. I was doing my job. October 4th. I read aloud, my voice cutting through her panic. $500,000 wire transferred to Dream Weddings Inc. Paid directly from the stolen funds. I looked at Amber. She was standing frozen in her couture gown, her face pale, her mouth slightly open. Your wedding isn't a gift. Amber, I said, my tone flat. It's grand larceny. I clicked the remote again. November 1st. $200,000 transferred to Tiffany Vance Consulting. I turned to look at my mother, who was now trembling, her face a mask of terror. Consulting for what? Mom? How to frame your daughter. How to spend money that belongs to a woman you locked away. The evidence was relentless. It wasn't just numbers anymore. It was a narrative of betrayal written in wire transfers. Every dollar they spent on flowers, en champagne, on this very room, was a dollar they stole from the woman who built this family. You wanted a gift? I said into the microphone, looking directly at the crowd. Here is the truth. You stole from a dying woman to pay for a party. You slapped me because I wouldn't let you steal my home to cover your tracks. You are not parents. You are thieves. Tiffany lunged for the laptop, her hands like claws. But Sean held her back. His face was gray. He knew. He knew that the numbers didn't lie. He knew that every person in that room, his business partners, his creditors, his social circle was seeing the anatomy of his failure projected in high definition. He looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in his eyes. Not anger. Fear. And then, the doors at the back of the ballroom opened. A silence swept through the room, heavier than before. 2 federal agents walked in, their badges catching the light. And between them, leaning on a cane but walking under her own power, was Great Aunt Margaret. She wasn't senile. She wasn't confused. She was furious. Tiffany gasped, her hand flying to her throat. Margaret? But you're alive? Margaret's voice was raspy but clear, projecting to the back of the room without a microphone. Lucid? Aware that you sold my house while I was sleeping? She walked up the center aisle, the sea of guests parting for her like the Red Sea. She didn't look at the crowd. Her eyes were locked on her niece. She stopped at the foot of the stage and looked up. I authorized the audit. Tiffany, Margaret said, her voice cutting through the tension. I told Sierra to look. And unlike you. She listened. Sean stepped forward to the edge of the stage, his hands shaking so violently I could see his cufflinks trembling. Margaret, please. It's a misunderstanding. I can explain. It was a loan. I was going to pay it back. A loan? Margaret laughed. A dry, harsh sound that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. You forged my digital signature. Sean, that's not a loan. That's a felony. She turned to the agents and pointed a gnarled finger at him. That's him. Sean panicked. The veneer of the successful businessman dissolved, leaving behind a terrified, small man. He pointed a trembling finger at Tiffany. It was her idea. She told me you wouldn't notice. She said we needed the money for the wedding or we'd be humiliated. She made me do it. The room gasped. The secondary twist. The cowardice. He was throwing his wife under the bus to save himself. But he wasn't done. The pressure broke something inside him, and the truth came spilling out like bile. And she knew about the money I took before. She knew I didn't just lose it at the tables. He pointed wildly at a young woman sitting in the second row, Amber's maid of honor. She knew I spent it on her. She paid me to keep quiet about the affair so Amber wouldn't find out before the wedding. The maid of honor turned beet red and buried her face in her hands. Amber screamed. A raw, guttural sound of pure betrayal. Tiffany looked like she had been shot. This was the arrogance leak. The final, dirty secret spilling out onto the marble floor. It wasn't just gambling. It was infidelity. It was a rot so deep it had consumed them all. I stood there, watching them turn on each other, watching the facade crumble into dust. It was fascinating. In a horrific way. It made me realize something profound about power. We tend to think of power as something solid, something internal. But looking at my parents, I realized their power was an illusion. It was the illusion of the empty wallet. They had built their entire identity on the foundation of wealth they didn't possess. Their confidence, their sneering superiority, their ability to make me feel small, it was all rented. They were tenants in a life they couldn't afford. Without the stolen money to prop them up, without the expensive clothes and the prestigious address, they had no character to stand on. They were empty shells. Collapsing under the weight of their own gravity, they thought money made them important. They didn't understand that money just makes you loud. Character makes you important. And right now, stripped of their stolen assets, they were nothing. Just screaming strangers in a ballroom they hadn't paid for. Margaret looked up at me. She didn't smile, but her eyes were warm. She nodded once. It's done. It was. I stepped down from the stage. I didn't look at Tiffany, who was now sobbing on the floor. I didn't look at Amber, who was tearing off her veil. I walked past them as if they were ghosts. Because they were. The people I thought were my family had died a long time ago. These were just the phantoms who had haunted my bank account. I walked out of the plaza with Margaret. The cool night air hit my face, and I took a deep breath. It tasted like rain and exhaust and something else, freedom. The police were already moving in, taking statements, securing the scene. I saw Sean being led out in handcuffs, his head bowed, the fight completely gone from him. Tiffany was sitting on a chair in the lobby, weeping into her hands, while Amber screamed at a bewildered caterer. Still trying to exert control in a world where she no longer had any, I declined to press charges for the assault. The federal case for wire fraud and forgery was more than enough. I didn't need to add to the pile. I just wanted to be gone. I pulled out my phone and blocked every single number. Mom, Dad, Amber, the aunts who had whispered about me, the cousins who had laughed at my boring job. All of them. Blocked. Deleted. Gone. I reached into my purse and pulled out the diamond earring. I looked at it for a moment, thinking about the slap, about the years of being the invisible wallet, about the girl who thought she had to pay for love. Then I put it back on. I fastened the clasp. It shone in the streetlight, bright and hard and unbreakable. Just like me, I hailed a cab. Margaret squeezed my hand. Her grip was strong, surprising for her age. You did good, kid, she said, her voice rough with emotion. You did real good. I just balanced the books. I said, that's all. I got into the cab. I gave the driver my address. My address. My penthouse. My home. As we drove away, I looked back at the hotel one last time. They thought I was an asset to be liquidated. They forgot I was the one keeping the books. And now, the ledger was finally closed. If you've ever had to audit your own life and cut out the fraud, share this story. You are not alone.